Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's invoice and estimate layouts call. Today, we are going to be going over how to create the layouts within the system. My name is Brittany, if you did not already know. We will record today's call. It will be available on the support site. Usually in a couple of days, we'll go ahead and post that recording. So if someone was unable to attend, you can always send it to them whenever it posts. Okay, so that's the housekeeping. If you have any questions, you can either use the chat or the Q&A to go ahead and ask, and then I'll stop periodically to go through and actually touch on any of those questions that you do have. Keep in mind that we're not going to be building your actual invoice layouts today. It's more of just, here's the tools, here's how to get it done. And then, of course, if you do have any questions about your specific layout, you're more than welcome to email your support person at support@workamajig.com, and then they can help you with any of the specific questions you have about your layout. So a little bit of housekeeping. Not everyone can get to the layouts. It is based off of your rights. If you're an admin, then no problem. Otherwise, if you're not an admin, then you do need admin/manager access, and you need to be able to get to these security settings here. At a minimum, you need billing options. So if you're an admin and want to know how to get someone to there, if you go into those security settings here, it is going to be under the system administrator section. Okay, so they need maintain setup information in order to get to system settings. And then they would also need the option for the edit time options in here. They also need edit billing. This is really the one that they need in order to get to those invoice and estimate layouts. Okay, so that is the rights that they would need. They would need admin, which is basically this. They need system setup, which is this. And again, those two rights would be clicking on this option, and then they need those billing options there. That will get them to the invoice layouts. Now you'll notice on mine, there's two different options. Here's the estimate templates. Here's estimate or invoice templates. Here's estimate templates. And then we have one called invoice and estimate layouts. The difference between the two is these ones are quite simple. They're easy to use. They're pretty straightforward. There's not a whole lot to them. You basically go in. You might have just two here. The defaults are detailed and summary. Obviously, you can make additional ones, but if you go into those, it's basically, what do you want to show? Do I show quantity? Do I show all summary lines for the line detail? Or do I show all top level? If I show expense detail, then obviously I get a bunch of other options. So these are pretty straightforward. You either check the box that you want or you uncheck it if you don't want it. Kind of go through, figure out what you would like to have on there. You can go to the layout. This is where you add in your logo. And then where do things fall on that invoice layout? And then you have your fonts and sizes, whether it's bold and italicized. So again, there's not a whole lot to these. They're pretty basic. They're easy to use. And so if you don't really need anything too fancy, these are a great option, either for the estimate side or the invoice side. So obviously this is specific to creating your client invoices. This is specific to estimates. Okay. These ones are more of the designer tool. They're a little bit harder to use. This is really what we will focus on today, is how to go through and make those custom layouts if these ones don't work for you. Now, if you don't have this heading at all and you do have rights to this particular section, it means it needs to be turned on. So that's going to be in your transaction preferences. So again, for the older clients, this is turned on automatically. If you're a bit newer in this system, then you're going to go to that account information. There's transaction preferences here. And then it is under the client invoice side, there's going to be a use, or maybe it's the other one. One of these has the link to go in and actually set up the more customized tools. So estimates, that's probably where it is. It is this one. So enable the advanced invoices and estimate layout designer. If you don't have this checked, then you're not seeing that option in here. So go to your estimates, enable this, and then you'll need to refresh in order to get that to come in. Once you have that, then you'd be able to go into these more advanced layouts. Now, an important note is when you create the invoice, that plays a huge role in what your invoices actually do. No matter what you do in the invoice layouts, if you just do one line, and I'll show you what I'm talking about in a bit, but if you just say one line, no matter how much detail you put into your estimate layouts, you might not get the time detail. So what services were billed and what expenses were billed and the quantities and all of that. So I'll show you what when you're creating the invoice, how much that actually affects what the layouts actually do. Okay, so they go hand in hand. That's why when you're building these estimate layouts out, there's not really a like a here's what it would look like if you go in and print it. Because again, how you create the invoice plays a huge role in what actually prints out once you go in. So there's no example of what it looks like once you set these up. And again, it's because of however you create the invoice can affect how much or how little detail shows in here. So when we're in here, you'll notice we have a bunch of basics in here. I have a few more just because I've been playing around with them. But if you have not gone through and deleted or edited these, then you should have the defaults that Workamajig provides. The idea is that hopefully you find one that's similar to what you're looking for, and then you just copy from that one and then modify it to get it to where you want. It's a lot harder to start from scratch, so it's definitely not something that we recommend. When you go through and add a new one, you'll notice you can just add a blank one, which again, we don't really recommend. Try and copy from one just to get some of the basics in there, but you have a copy existing. This is really what we recommend is that you go in, copy from an existing one, label it, and then which layout are we copying from, right? And you can kind of pick and choose, which is a little bit newer. But you can say the estimate side, I want to go ahead and copy this particular estimate. And then on the invoice side, we like this one and copy the items option from here. So you can go in and determine what level you want to copy from. So I won't actually do that, but I'm going to get into actually creating the invoice first. So I set up two different projects. One's going to be time and material. One is going to be fixed fee, right? So obviously time and material bills the actuals of the projects, and then fixed fee just bills to estimate. So obviously that plays a huge role in what your layouts actually look like as well. So I'm going to start with time and material. Obviously I have to have things to bill in this project. So I did load it with some time and some expenses so that we actually have something to bill. And regardless of where you bill, so I know that there's billing from within the project, there's billing from billing worksheets, there's billing from the today page, the billing today page. Kind of regardless of where you go in and bill from, you are going to have different options on how to create the invoice. So I'm just going to bill from within the project. Again, there's no right or wrong way because you will have some of the same options in each of the screens that you can bill from. So if I'm just going to bill everything, I'm just going to check everything. I'm going to go ahead and bill it. This is what I was referring to as far as how the system will determine what level of detail will actually print. So again, I can put all the detail I want in my layout, but if I just do one line, which basically is just project level, it's not really going to show me that I had account management and art and creative and design and some sort of expenses in there, regardless of how much detail I put in that layout. So if you want detail, then you need to choose, do I show tasks as my line detail? Do I show service and item? Do I group it by those billing items? So if I have these 3 different services, do I just group them all under one heading, which is called a billing item in our system? and just call it professional services, right? So this plays a huge role in it. You want to click which one makes the most sense or gives you what level of detail. So if I do want the items to show, then I'm going to say one per service and item. And that's the one that I'll go with for now. We can delete this and create this a couple of different ways just to see what it looks like. But at the time that I go in and create this invoice, that's when it's going to pull whatever the layout is. So either at the client level, I go in and determine which layout I'm going to choose, or you can do that at the project level. So what I mean by that is I'm going to jump back to that project really quickly. Under your project settings, you have the billing options in here. There is going to be a section where you choose what layout, right? So sometimes you want to have this set before you go in and bill it. I'm going to choose something that does give some detail. So probably that billing item and item one. Otherwise, this one can show time and expenses in here as well. So I think I'll just choose this one. Save. So now it should reference that particular layout that we chose. What's nice is you can jump directly into that layout from here. So if I wanted to take a look, see what it has, since I'm building a invoice, we do want to be on the invoice side, right? That's what will kind of show us and tell us what we have in here. So for one, here's that time detail expense breakout. Here's the expense detail breakout. So because I have these in here and because I'm billing by, service and item, I should have a little bit more detail than just doing one line. So I'm going to go ahead and create that invoice. And then what happens is because I told it to do per service and item, here's all of my services, and then here is all of the items. So now I have 6 different lines in here. So on my invoice, I should have 6 different lines as well, right? Because it's going to usually just reference one per line that you have. If I had just done tasks, then my line subject would be the tasks that each of these services or items hit. If there was no task, like on some of our expenses, we don't hit a task, completely fine, but it might just not reference a task in general for that. So what happens when I went in and I build by service and item, it basically tucked each of the transactions into those lines. So all of the account management labor got tucked into account management. Art and creative got tucked into that art and creative design. So you'll notice that it'll break it down, and behind each of these lines, there's actually transactions that it's pointing to. Okay, now if I want to see or make sure that it picked what layout that I chose, you can go into the details. There's that layout. You can also jump to it directly from here if you wanted to. But if I want to see what this looks like just right off the bat, then I can go in and print it. I know it's going to use that layout because it showed it. So again, I did one line per service and item. So I got those 6 different lines, which matches what's in the invoice, right? So not a ton of detail, but definitely some detail that we're seeing. It's just one line per line that you actually show in there, okay? So obviously I would change my logo. We usually get rid of this as far as the description on what the invoice is. So this is how I usually work these layouts. I see what did it print out as. I keep this up and then I have another screen going to where I go in and update or make the changes that I want to see in there. So if I'm in here, I can change the logo. If you double click into here, it then updates or opens up your computer, and then you can choose whatever it is you want. My logo's too big, so it's just showing us like a black line. Maybe I have a different one that I can use. If not, it's not a big deal, but that's ultimately where you can go in and update the logos. You just double click, it then opens up your computer to where you can actually go in and choose what layout or what logo you want. You'll see it has the client information and then the billing contact information and format billing address. If you wanted to change that, then usually what people will do is they will click on components, and then you need to figure out where you're at. So you're in the report header. So I'd kind of choose something that's in the header, right? There's where all of this information is. This one says page footer. So then you'll see there's usually some or page header. So it usually falls under the header information. Then when you're in the detail, that is usually where you see things like the invoice lines, and then you get to your footers, right? So these fields would then apply to the footer section. Some of these cannot be pulled into some of the top sections. So if it's a footer, it really can only go in the footer sections rather than header. So if there's times where you're trying to drag something and there's usually like this little circle with the line through it, that means that that's not a field that could go up in the header. So it's not every field, but certain ones can't go in an area that it's not really designated for, especially like the breakouts. Okay. So all of your components or all of the fields that are available are under the components section. You can click and drag them where you want them to go. You can also do things like just labels. So when I see something like something that doesn't have an at, so it reads time detail up here, that means that we went in, we put a label, and we just manually typed what we wanted. Anything with an at means it's pulling from a particular field in the system. So obviously things like at billing contact would look to the contact of the client and then figure out which one is the billing contact, client name. These are all labels, right? And then you'll see the ats next to that where it's at invoice number, at invoice date, at due date. So a lot of people will just put the labels. Some people don't put labels, they just have the ats, which is fine. The reason why they might not do the labels is if there isn't something like maybe there isn't an account manager. Well, I have an account manager field, and then over here might be blank, right? So some people use the labels, others do not. Completely up to you on what you want to do. But you could also do lines. A lot of people like to make it a little bit more fancy. And so with that, you can do a horizontal line, and then you can expand it out wherever you want to, right? And I know this doesn't really look like a good spot for it, but you're moving it with that little arrow. You're just kind of putting your cursor on that. And then when you get those lines, that's how you can kind of expand it out. And then is it, a solid line? Is it transparent, which wouldn't make sense, but you have a dash dot, dash dot, dash dot dot. So obviously within each of the components, there might be some different options. So you kind of want to pay attention to what's showing on your screen, and I am highlighted on the line. So that's what it's showing me is the properties of that particular line. You can also do things like changing the color of it. Obviously zeros are all going to make it just black. Otherwise, you can choose any other color in here, or if you know the color number that you're looking for, you can type that in as well. So obviously each field might have different options, might have different things that it looks for as far as font sizes, whether it's bold, italicized, whether it's underlined. You can even do borders for certain fields. So if I wanted a border around something in particular, you can go in and choose again. It's kind of similar options as you saw for the line, but what is your border? If you scroll down, this usually is just where it's at in the grid, but something that you might want to pay attention to is the can shrink and can grow. What this means is if I have a field that might be short or long, just depending, so like client name is a good one, usually you want that to shrink and grow. And what that does is it just allows the field to expand and contract based off of the size of what the verbiage is, right? So client name could be short like tests, or it could be Workamajig and Company Greater North America or something like that, which is a really long name. So in that case, we want certain fields to shrink and grow so that it can maybe not get cut off. Like if I have this too short and when I'm looking at this, it might be cut off a bit. I might not see the whole thing if I'm not allowing that field to expand and contract. So this is definitely something where certain fields, you'll want that to be turned on. Any questions right now? I don't see any in the chat. Sorry, I don't know how this opened. I don't even know what this is. There we go. But any questions? I don't see anything yet, but I'm going to stop just to make sure we don't have any questions. And also for my computer to figure out what it's doing. There we go. Okay. So obviously, we want to be on that invoice side. The components are what you can pull out into the grid if you want things like the page number, or if you want to make something a little bit bigger or shorter. So my page header, it's really contracted. It's very small. So if I want to, I have to click on this to get the little option to open up or expand that page header. And then in that case, I might do something like page number, and then also something like how many pages there are total. Now these are coming out a little bit small, right? So I need to go in and kind of move them, expand them a little bit. Otherwise, they will be cut off whenever I go in and actually print it using those particular fields. So obviously you can move things where you want either by clicking, or you can use the arrows on your keyboard to move them where you want. If you want to move two fields at once, you can click and highlight. Now we're moving both so that maybe I can move them up or down because maybe I got them aligned properly, which you can always use some of these to kind of get that to happen. Otherwise, you can just kind of pull them out wherever you need them to go. For certain fields, you'll see currency symbols. So if you guys are using multi-currency, then do we want this particular field to show a currency symbol or not? So maybe it's the pound symbol, or maybe it's the the number sign. So just know if you're using multi-currency, you do have the option to show currency symbol whenever applicable if you need it. And then for the detail section, this is ultimately where it's going to look for what it is that should print on the invoice. So I mentioned it's basically going to print one line per line that you have in your invoice, right? So if I look at my invoice, we had those 6 different lines. It's always looking for the subject. So the subject, because of how I created this by service and item, the subject is each service and item. If I had done task or billing item, then obviously my labels would be a little bit different, but it's always going to be line subject. Line subject is akin to basically your line subject here. Right, and these got labeled because of how we set up that invoice. Div your line subject, I put in the project. I also have project description and line description in there. So if I'm going in and printing this out again, then you'll see that you have the project listed for each one of those. Now I know for sure I did not put in a project description for any of those, so no project description. And then also my lines, I didn't really put an extra line in there, line description, because I didn't really need it. Right, there's not a whole lot that I needed to show on that invoice. Maybe this is exactly what my client needs. Maybe I don't need this project number in here. This is good, and it'll even say this one's more for if you're billing multiple projects at the same time. Well, then, each of these lines might be for a different project. So it's maybe good to reference which project each of these items is going to be for. So if it's a multi-invoice line, then the project number or project name is a great idea to have in there. If this is always just going to be for one project at a time, then maybe you don't really need that detail. So in here, I'm going to go ahead and collapse this a little bit. Obviously, you can move those back and forth. If I need more room in any of those sections, I'm going to keep expanding so that I actually can see it a little bit better in here. One other kind of big item whenever you are using these layouts is the settings tab. So in here, number one, it's going to be the name, but if I am doing an estimate, this is really, these two sections here are really only for an estimate only. What level of task do I use? Do I use all tasks, top level, or summary? And then do I show the transaction at the lowest level or not? And then my line format. So again, this is mainly for when you're estimating, you don't really have transactions at this point, but what level of detail do I show? Do I show by task? Do I show by service? Or do I show by billing item? So obviously that plays a big role in what line detail or what line subject actually shows for an estimate. Part of that is when you have an estimate, you have the option of how do I set up that estimate? Do I create the estimate by task and service, by task only, by service, or by task and person? If I choose that my estimate is going to be by just service, but I have this by task, it might not show very well because you don't really have service information on maybe the layout. So just keep in mind that sometimes your line format has to match your estimate format in there. This also plays a big role in what actually shows. So you'll notice a lot of my items are no detail, right? So it's not actually showing me detail. And so even though I have this time detail grid or my expense grid, I'm not really actually seeing the date and the description and the person that did those time entries, even though we have that information kind of tucked into the layout. And that's because of this. We call this the service tree, or basically the item tree. It basically allows the system to either show the transactions or not show the transactions. So this will either populate if I have details showing in here, or if it's not populating, it's because everything is set to no detail. So I know for sure one of my items was transaction or was supplies. Another one was my account management. So we'll just put a few of these to transactions, and then we're actually going to recreate the invoice. So even though I'm updating this now, the invoice already was created, so it's not actually going to show my changes just yet. I think one of my other items was, let's see, art and creative. There it is. Oh, I have transactions there, I have transactions there. And then I had design coordinator. There it is. So we'll put a few of those to actually showing transactions. I'm going to go ahead and save that. Again, if I go in and try and reprint this, nothing will change because it's already kind of set that to be how it is. So in here, there's something for like, do we show the detail? That was already set to no because of how we created that invoice. So if I go through and delete this invoice and I kind of refresh this page, so there's all my transactions again. I go in and bill it. I'm going to do the same thing that I did before. Service an item, go ahead and create it. It's going to look the same on the line detail. So when that opens up, but you'll notice it says, hey, go ahead and show the transactions. And again, it's because of that, the tree that I just showed you where it's saying, well, if I have certain transactions, do I show it or not? And then if there was a billing item, it'll actually show those too. I did not bill it by billing item. So we're not really seeing that in there, but now you'll see my detail sections actually populate because again, we told it, go ahead and show the transactions of those or the detail of those transactions, right? And only one of my expenses shows because I didn't actually have it show the transaction detail for print media or for shipping. I only did it for supplies. Okay. So again, that plays a big part of what it actually looks like. But that's how you can get those to show. So that's one question that a lot of clients have is, hey, I have the grid pulled out onto my layout, right? I have it here. It should show my date and person and hours and amount and all of that, but it's not. And it's because of either the layout saying no transactions, or when I created it, I created just one line. I didn't tell it to actually show me the transactions and the what's behind, the numbers of each of these lines. Okay. So that is going to pull from the information. So again, I build time and material, which means that it's pulling the transactions that we put to that project, the quantities and who put it, that all comes in only if we build that one line per service and item or billing item and item, anything that kind of references items and or services, then you're going to be able to get detail. But if you don't reference that, if you just do like one line or one line per task, these would be task names. And you might see some of the information like labor tucked into those. But again, it just depends on, at that point, what does your tree look like? Does it allow transactions or not? Now you have this reset items to default, which just means that it can go back to what your system is set up as. So this is a billing item. These are items. This is pulling from my service list and saying, or not my service, but my item list, my purchase items or my media items. What do those show? Do they show that they're tucked into a billing item or not? So I have a couple in my billing or my media. I was trying to collapse those. I have a billing item called reimburse out of pocket, other outsource, and then production, professional services. Anything that's on the same level as these, that means that they're not with a billing item. So I just don't have a billing item for iStock photos or an item called taxable or new item. Anything that's on this level, it doesn't really have a billing item. So they're just completely on their own. So when it's looking to billing item and item, it might have these as my billing items, but then these will just kind of be on their own line because they're on the same level as the billing items. So more of like a header rather than a sub item. Any questions right now? Okay. So some people, so I'm going to remove these really quickly, just to kind of show you. If I delete it, you can either use the delete on your keyboard or you can use this one, either way. But when you go in and delete that, if you want to get that back, then of course it's a component. It is going to be called a subsection. So scroll down, you'll see there's the time one, the expense one is already out there. But if I go through and bring it out, it always brings it out like this. You can choose what you actually see on there. Like you can move things around, you can edit the fields in there. But ultimately, there we go. If you click into here, when you click on the components, it's basically going to be the components just for this particular section, right? Meaning the labor, the expenses. So this is all you have as far as detail for time. You won't really see these fields anywhere else. So if I'm not clicked into this component, if I click out, then when you look into here, you won't really find that those fields, like the service or the person, the quantity, that's not going to show unless you're actually clicked into here. So it's kind of exclusive to this particular thing. Same with the expenses. There's just certain fields that only show when you're clicked into this particular grid. You can obviously expand these out. If you wanted to remove or change what actually shows, maybe I don't need these headings, or maybe I don't want to see, quantities or something like that, then you can always remove it or you can add to it. So if I said, go ahead and show me the hours, you basically can put it wherever it should go. Sorry, there we go. So there's my little circle that I was saying. There's certain sections that you can put things in. I can't put it up here, but I can put it in this lower section. So what happens is it actually puts a label for it, and it'll kind of put it in that header section of this time detail block, and then the actual it puts it in the lower section that would have the details. So usually what I do is kind of adjust it where I want it to go. And then I'll go through and kind of adjust the hours one as well. You can obviously make these bigger or smaller depending on what you're looking for. You can remove the comments, like if you don't want billing comments per transaction. So like if we're in the service side, when you go in and do a time transaction, you can put comments, should those comments show in here or not? So, a lot of people would say no. So you can go in and delete that to just be whatever you want it to be. So that's kind of some of the nuances with these. And again, you're only going to get some of these fields like hours and service and labor when you're actually clicked into that particular field. Same thing with the expenses. There's different components. Markup would be something that we usually don't add out there, but if you wanted to see the markup, you absolutely could. Okay, so that's mostly the invoice side. I will show you the fixed fee side. So I showed you labor. Fixed fee is obviously going to be a lot different because it's not really going to reference transactions, but it's based off of estimates, right? So for fixed fee, it goes off of an approved estimate. So for this project, it's $7,900 total. I did mine by task and service. I mentioned the other options are by service only, by task only, and by task and person. If I just do something by task, but I only have services listed on my layout, or vice versa, if I choose by service here, but I have my layout by task, it's not going to show anything when I go to print that out. So just be mindful of when you're choosing your estimate type, you also need to think back to what your layout is doing. So again, if I choose by service here, but my layout is by task, it's a mismatch and not really going to print anything out. Okay. So I did mine by task and service, which gave me, some detail as far as here's all of my tasks, here's how many hours per task, and here's the detail of rates and quantities and services and all of that. So it's approved, which means that that is ultimately what the system will bill. Go in and bill it. Now, there's a couple of ways to do this. The default is that it just shows this one amount item. And so usually it's just one line that shows either project name or project number, and then however much you're billing. But people sometimes still want to see either task information or service information, even though we're not billing the actuals, it'll use service information based off of what you have in your estimate. So then what happens is if it'll show everything that is on that estimate. You can go in and choose what you want to bill. Am I billing 100% or just 50% of all of those? Because we're billing 50% now and 50% later. Well, when I go in and create this, it's then going to have these as my line subjects. If I just do the one line, again, what's going to happen is it's just going to put in that one line. So I can say revenue invoice. Again, there's no options for me of one line per because this is fixed fee. My one line per kind of comes from whatever I chose here. So I mentioned it's just going to show that one line, not really have a whole lot of detail. If I do, again, something different, I'll do this and just do 50%. Then obviously it's going to do one line per service that I have. So even though it's fixed fee, you can still have something like this where you have a line subject and it shows each of those services. And then again, depending on what my layout had, I might see either lots of detail or no detail, right? So this is just using that, that one line per service, not a whole lot of detail behind it. But again, it's a fixed fee project. So I usually wouldn't have quantities and people and all of that. It's just going to have the one line per service that you had in there. Any questions right now? Okay, so when I go back to that layout, just going to jump to it from here. This is the side that we're really looking at, right? Is the estimate side. Obviously, the options for this are going to be a little bit different. You're not going to have like a a time grid that's going to come out. You actually do have an expense grid that can come out, and that's just because you can obviously estimate for expenses in there. But your subject would then either be task, service, or by what was the other one? I can't remember, but so you have just those 2 or 3 options that are in there. It's either usually by task or by service that you're seeing for that. It might be billing item as well, just depending on how you have it set up. But then that's what it's going to do for that. And again, for the estimate, yeah, by service or by task, by billing item is what I was mentioning. This is ultimately where you kind of have to pay attention to the by your estimate type. That's what this is really going to take a look at. So obviously, my estimate side will have a lot of the same fields, but not exactly the same, but it does work the same where you find what components you want. They're all going to be broken out into different sections in there. So things like the estimate description and whether it's a change order or not, and who your approvers are. Your client address information you can put wherever. So company means your company. And then of course, client would be the client that you're actually doing business for. And then project information, things like the project description. You can even do project type, although I don't know that the client really needs to know that. If you have project manager, you have that project account manager. So obviously there's 2 different fields, account manager and project manager. You could show both or just one of those on here. But you're just clicking and dragging things where you want them to go. And then you can kind of look through, figure out what fields you want to build out or what you want in there and whether there's different subsections that you want. If you have custom fields set up in your system, you can also pull out some of those custom fields. So I have one just called annoyance level. And so if I wanted to, I can pull that out so that it actually shows in here as well. Now there is a question. Someone said, not a question, but a comment, to make sure everything is lining up properly, show everyone how to increase the size of the view so that they can actually see how the lines show up. So if you're kind of looking at these, you can highlight as many of those fields as you want to, and then there's the arrows in to kind of zoom into the section that you're looking for, so that you can actually see whether they are lining up as well. It'll show you, I know some of these don't always really give you a great example of what it is, but you can kind of see what position they are. You have the X and Y axis, kind of like you would for, any math thing. But yeah, you can use these zoom in, zoom outs if you want to. You can also have it just go back to 100% if you use this. If you are familiar with the deliverables, it's kind of the same engine for that. You can also undo or redo things. So undo and redo are both an option in there. And then some people mention that you should save as you go. I also like this just because if you've been working on it for a while, as I work on one particular section and I kind of finish it, then I go ahead and save. Just in case my computer crashes or, whatever it is that might prevent me from being able to save it from that point. So definitely save as you go because it's not doing that for you. Okay. Any other questions right now? Okay. So that was the estimate side. Again, it is dependent on really what you utilize, this is the time and materials, I need to be over here, what you utilize as far as the invoice by, right? Again, one line or percentage of task or service an item, billing an item. If you're doing something in the mass billing pages, which is your menu, you have billing, there's the today billing. You want to make sure that your project is set to have what layout it's using, or in the client record, you can also specify that. But obviously, if you're using these buckets, there's not a whole lot that you can do as far as the layout. You need to make sure that you have your layout referenced already, but it will show you the one line per. If I just do client, then I'm not going to get a whole lot, one invoice per. This is one line per. This is what I was trying to reference, but you have one line per. If I just do something for invoice, then it's just going to have that top level line, no detail, even though there's time and material. So whether you're billing from within the project or this mass billing, you have this one line per. Again, you want to make sure that this is set for what level of detail that you want. If you're more of a billing item type of person where it's just kind of giving you top level. So for mine, it was called professional services, where I could have lumped several of those services just under that one line. You could do something like that, or you could do billing item and item, which just means that if something doesn't have a billing item, then it still shows on there as well. Someone asked, is this a version of Crystal Reports? I'm not familiar with Crystal Reports, so I actually don't know. But these were available if you were working in Flash back in the day, these were available in Flash. They're pretty much the same thing. Okay, so that's really the invoice layouts. My caveat to you, or my mention to you, is don't override the defaults. Just copy them, right? Because some people say, hey, I messed with that one. How can I get it back to what it was before? Not really a way to do that. I mean, we can reload the defaults, but we have to kind of update the ones that you have in here in order to do that. So my recommendation is to just copy from these. Like if you like the way this is set up, keep this one as it is, and then just copy from it. So I showed you how to just copy from one. You can label it similar, or you can call it whatever you want in your layout name, but then decide, what am I copying from, right? So again, if I said that I liked this one, and the reason that there's two different options in here is because so when I had that project, right? I could only choose one layout. I was here, I only have one layout. So this covers the estimate and the invoices, right? So I need both sides of this. So if I'm pulling any of these up, I need this to be how I want it to be for that particular estimate. And then I need this to be how I want it to be for that same project. I can't choose two for this. So with that, if I chose that this project is going to use the multi-project detail, the time breakouts, then this is going to apply to the estimate and the invoice. So when I'm looking at that one, this one, I think it's using this for the estimate, and then it would use this for the invoice. Some people say, hey, I like the invoice for this one, but I like someone else's estimate. Like maybe this one works for the estimate side. Well, that's when you can go in, copy from a existing one, and then, we'll just call this test. The layout side, maybe I, again, liked this one. And for the invoice side, maybe I liked what was set up on this one. And then this is more for like the tree that I was talking about. What level of detail did I want? Maybe the tree for this one worked best. So when I go in and save, it should be what showed on that one invoice, or for the estimate side for this one. And then the invoice side looks like there wasn't an invoice on the one that I copied from. So this is blank, right? If you need to start over, you can always delete the whole thing and then just recopy from there. Someone said, for estimates, how do I set up a flat fee for the project? For example, the client has approved 65,000, so need to allocate by person. I just want to do 65 total. What we usually recommend for that, especially if you're not showing detail on your layout, all you would have to do is almost doesn't matter which one, but some people just say, oh, for this, I always just toggle to service only, go in and save. And then anywhere, whether you put it in labor or expenses, you can just type the gross of 6,500 wherever you want. Because if I just do one line when I create the invoice, or whether I have I'd probably do so I have that one in there. Hold on, let me unapprove this one. So when I go in and create or print out that estimate, sorry, let me see which one we have referenced. Oh yeah, that's the other thing that a lot of clients ask about is if you're here and you're looking at those estimate settings, it only shows the templates. Now the templates are not the same as the layouts. These were like the detailed summary, whatever. So you have a show more. That's where you can then see this. But that's where you could just put the gross anywhere and then just make sure that you don't really have a detailed one. So just like I have it by billing items on that layout. So I'd probably change that to by service or something like that. And then it could just show one line, have the project name instead of what the service is, and just be 6,500. So just put your gross anywhere. Doesn't really matter what service or item that you choose. Because again, if you're showing no detail for that particular item or items, then it'll just show project name or project number. I can't remember which one. I think it's project name and then the total of that layout, or not the layout, but the total of that estimate. Okay, so any other questions? Okay, so then again, those housekeeping tips, copy instead of updating the defaults. If you do not have the defaults and you want them, email your account manager. We can reload those into the system. The only caveat is, so this is one of the defaults. It's named EST and INV with subtotals. When we go to reload them, when we try and reload them, if it finds one that matches that name, it's not going to load it. So usually what we recommend doing is updating the name, putting like a ZZ or something that's going to make it no longer the same name as what the defaults were, so that when we load it in, it'll actually load in this particular one. Okay, so I mean, your account manager would know that, but just keep in mind that we'd have to rename or add something to some of these names. Like this one, I did that already. I put an 11 so that I could reload my basics in there, or the defaults. So just know that we would have to update the names in some sort of way in order to get them not to be the default names. So hopefully that helped. As you're working on those, I recommend saving as you're going. I also would mention that your account manager can help with those, but you need to have a couple of things set up first. So for one, what invoice are you using? Right. So have an invoice or an estimate that you're going in and printing. What we like to see, or what I require my clients to do, is print it out and send me a copy with the markups. Say, okay, I circled here and I want this gone. I want this to be bold. I want this to be italicized. Print it out exactly as it is printing out now, and then mark up the sheet either, through like edits, or if you want to print it out and then mark it up and then take a picture of that or scan it in, however you want to get it to me. But that's really what we need, is what invoice or estimate are you using? What layout is it? And then what are the changes that you need? Some of them will be simple, some of them won't be, but just know that since it's not really a standard offering, it might take your account manager a little bit longer. It doesn't really fall within the 24-hour, we're going to fix it in 24-hour rule. So if you do need some help, just know it usually takes a little bit longer for us to make those estimate and invoice layouts, but you do have to have it set up. You can't just say, hey, here's what I'm looking for, do it. You do have to start those layouts for us, and then we'll handle any issues that you're actually having with those. All right, so any last questions before I let you all go? Okay, so thank you all for your time. Again, if you do have questions, just email support@workamajig.com. That would go directly to your account manager. And then if they need my assistance, they'll usually reach out to me anyway. So I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.